Welcome back to the Making Sense of Money podcast presented to you by P1FCU, where we tackle all the financial topics that matter the most to you. I'm your host, Tanis, and on today's episode, we are talking about money and mental health. And joining me today is Katie Johnson, social worker with St. Joe's. Hi, Katie.
Hi.
Thanks so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yes, I know what you do. I know, obviously, kind of a little bit about you, but I thought you could maybe kick us off by giving us a little background on your passions and where your career started.
Yes. So I kind of took a very long way around to get to where I'm at. I used to work in the dental world, so very different than what I do now. So then I decided to go back to school, got my bachelor's and my master's degree in social work, and did all the many hours of supervision and all the fun things to become a clinical social worker. And so that's what I do now. And I work at St. Joe's, like you said, but in the cancer center. So I work solely with cancer patients.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
I think it's so important to consider that every single area of just, at the hospital or in any kind of big life event, it's always so important to have that one person who can kind of spend direct time with them, So what you do is very cool.
Well, thank you.
Clearly, we're here to talk about how your world blends into mine. How does financial stress typically affect people's mental health?
Financial stress is probably one of the most common things that I hear about when I meet people, and whether that be currently with somebody who's undergoing cancer treatment or in my previous roles as I've worked in inpatient and outpatient mental health settings, and I hear it all the time. It is something that's very, very prevalent in everyday life. It really can affect people's anxiety, their stress levels, right? They just skyrocket through the roof. It can impact depression, actually significantly. It can make depression symptoms just horribly bad.
Makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Gosh.
Feeling down on yourself, right?
Yeah.
Like that self-esteem and self-worth component, that can really plummet. And then it actually can impact people's relationships, like conflicts, right, in relationships. And so that can cause some mental health discord as well.
From what you've seen in the work that you do, are there any early signs that someone is, struggling with that financial stress, like how it's affecting their mental health?
Yeah, I think probably one of the first signs is the irritability, that mood change that can happen with anxiety when you're just overstimulated almost, and you just you're already at your wit's end almost, and you just can't take any more. So I think that irritability component, trouble sleeping, I think that's a big one. And sleep is kind of that foundational need that we all need, right? We have to have that. And if we don't have sleep, then the one day stacks to the next day, and they stack. So you actually don't get that break, and your body and your mind can't process what's going on. And so difficulty concentrating, all of those early signs that can show hey, I'm having a hard time, and then finding, hey, it's finances. I'm struggling with finances.
Well, it can be hard too for someone to identify I'm having a hard time. Cue you, which is great because, you're not reading into that, the irritable, and you're really showing straight up empathy, just I know this is just your financial stress speaking to me right now, or stress or whatever it may be, which is hard to navigate. So clearly, it could probably be really hard for some of these people to ask for help, right? And how do you help patients kind of break that stigma and make them feel better about asking for help?
I feel like that's I just love that question. It's such a really good question because mental health stigma is a real thing. I think the really important thing to note with any kind of mental health, anything but we'll focus on finances today. So that's what we're going to stick with. But is that it is such, like I was saying earlier, such a common struggle. I was doing some research before I came, and there's a whole bunch of different numbers, but really it's between about 30, I think it was 33 to 57, we'll make that number up, percent of people are struggling financially, whether that be aren't making it paycheck to paycheck or making it paycheck to paycheck, or the people who are barely keeping their head above water. Yeah. And so that's that's millions of people. So I think the first step is knowing you're not alone.
Right.
There are so many people struggling financially. And out of all the therapy sessions that I've sat in with people and listened to all their vulnerable stories and all the things, is a lot. There's a lot of people who live with $2 in their paycheck for weeks at a time.
Right.
And I don't even know how they do it.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that's the first thing to know is you are not alone in that. And then breaking the stigma of finding somebody that you can trust and confide in, whether that be a friend or family member, finding a mental health therapist, a financial advisor, someone that you feel like you could go to kind of talk about, hey, this is what's going on. I'm having a hard time.
And you kind of help with that, right? Like connect them with resources or people, which is huge.
There are.
What role would you say mindset plays in someone's financial behavior?
Mindset plays a huge role in everything.
As you kind of mentioned, yeah.
Mindset, it forms from when we are children, right? So like growing up, all of that can be impacted from watching our parents, our childhood experiences, all the people in our lives. And so really it forms as a young kid, and then it follows with us through our adulthood. And so if we hear things like, I'll never make enough, or I'm really bad with money, or things like that, the way the brain works, the more we hear something or tell ourselves something, the more we're going to believe that.
Right.
And so the really cool thing about the brain is that we can actually reverse that, and we can stop those unhealthy thoughts and go back to positive thoughts of, I am worth it. You know, I'm doing better with money. Like I'm doing okay. And so I think mindset can play a huge role in how that works in therapy. Is one thing that will help with that.
So you can build your financial strengths into your daily affirmations.
You could. You absolutely could.
Write it on your mirror.
Yes, that's a great idea. I love that. I love mirror. I'm always like, take a sticky note, write a positive thing, and put it wherever you see it, whether that's on your fridge, on the, on the molding on your walking out the door.
Right.
Like wherever you're going to see it, in your car, computer screen.
So
something.
impactful. It's so important. I like to put them on my computer screen because we spend the most time at work, I feel. And it's always the thing that I stare at when I'm kind of dissociating. So that's really great. Yes. What about practices? I know we talked about, like, obviously just now affirmations, but are there any mental health practices that also help people manage their finances better? I mean, I know that it's kind of hard to tie those two together, but...
That's a good question. I feel like that is definitely an individualized question.
Right.
Like each person and situation is going to be different. And I think that like grounding techniques are really great when we're feeling overwhelmed. So like deep breathing or some people are textile people. Like if they need something to kind of play with, and that kind of can help. But I think one of the best things is pausing. So before you make a purchase, if you're having financial struggles, pause. Think about it. Be like, oh, I really want that jacket. Okay, well, I'm going to wait a week, and if I still really want that jacket and my finances are solid, I'll get the jacket, right? Well, after that week, you might not want the jacket anymore, right? Or you might want the jacket, and then you get it, and that's how that rolls. But so along with that pause in the interim, really self-reflecting on those things about where you're at in your life, and then journaling. That's a really great technique. It doesn't work for everybody, doesn't work for me, but it works for a lot of people. So finding what works for you and able to have that self-reflection, whether that be internally on paper, walking. That's a really great way to process and clear your head, walking with a friend. There's been a lot of research around walking 3 times a week for 30 minutes each time. That can actually act as a mild antidepressant. And so walking is really good for mental health, but that's a good way to just process and be mindful in the moments.
Got that.
Yeah.
It's interesting when you talk about journaling, because if I'm trying to tie mental health and money and my world and yours, it reminds me of just kind of that organization, staying on top of things and journaling, but also like keeping a checkbook register. Like I feel like those two kind of tie hand in hand, just knowing exactly what's going on with your money. Or some people think that that's an ancient method, but it's not. And I think more people should do it, but that kind of feels the same to me. It's like the financial journaling in a way.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I love that. I love, it's so simple. I mean, journaling doesn't have to be so crazy.
No.
But I think that those are really good methods.
I think part of that, and as I'm thinking while you're talking, is like keeping a budget is journaling, in a way.
Right.
And like I love spreadsheets, and I have a really stellar budgeting spreadsheet that I made.
Oh, I bet.
I'm a nerd like that. I love it, but that doesn't work for everybody, right? And so maybe it's maybe that's not their process. Maybe their process is the cash in the envelope technique, where you keep the different, but it's finding what works for you, right? And something that's sustainable. If it's not going to work for you, then it's not sustainable.
Right. That's the beauty about all of this is it's just not one size fits all.
It is not.
And that's amazing.
Yes.
So those things can lead to individuals being emotionally grounded. That can be hard, of course, but when facing big financial decisions, what are some things that could set that back?
I think when we get into big financial decisions and setbacks, I think it's really important, again, to pause. I think that's going to play a role here too, because when we have those big things that happen, we can start going downhill spirally, like those catastrophizing thoughts really fast, right? Like they can just happen and happen and happen. And so pausing and sticking with the facts. What are the facts? Is that how I'm feeling, or is that a fact? So separating those two things. And then also taking yourself out of it and your self-worth and untying those two together. Because if we have a big financial setback, that doesn't mean that you're a worthless human, right? Like finances and self-worth are just tied so much. So I think taking yourself out of that equation and just sticking with what are the facts, what do we need to do, and trying to go from there. And whether that's asking for help from somebody because maybe it's too much to do on your own, or whatever that looks like for you. But I think taking a break and just taking a step back.
That could be freeing, just asking for help. Like, holy cow.
Yeah, but it's one of the most vulnerable things you'll do, especially when it's tied to finances, because that's such a personal thing.
Yes, absolutely. I heard something, I can't remember exactly where I heard it, but it was like a what if thought is typically intrusive, and it's not something, something that you should fully dwell on. And I'm the kind of person who is like, what if this, what if that? We have to be prepared. Like, is that a hindrance as well? I mean, how would you advise someone to tackle that?
I think what ifs can be productive and unproductive. I think depends on which way they go.
How obsessive it is.
Yeah. I think they can go downhill pretty quick if you don't kind of have that realistic grasp on it. But I don't think it's bad to think about the what ifs. I think because part of that's reality.
Right.
And like, preparing. Okay, what if this happens? Well, it really could.
Yeah.
Like, so one of the questions that a lot of times when we're going through those what ifs or those catastrophizing thoughts of what's the likelihood of that actually happening?
Right.
2%. Okay, 2% that's actually going to happen.
Yeah.
So that kind of puts numbers back on that and go,
having to
that's
believe
like
those
actually
numbers.
not really going to happen, right?
That is so much easier said than done, though. It's like
all of this is so much easier said than done.
It's just why, that's like less than 1%, whatever. And it's like, oh, but like I could be that 1%. Like that could be me.
And that's where it spirals.
Yes. Oh yeah. See? Ugh. Well, what is one small step for people like me or someone that could take their mental health and improve it and tie that into their financial well-being? So improving everything all in one.
I think you said it's a small step. So we're not doing big steps,
right?
Big steps are not realistic. They're not smart. So it's small steps. And so depending on what the financial situation, it could be something so simple as, I stop at the coffee shop 5 days a week. Well, I want to go only 3 days, right? So you're going to cut out that small step. 2 days a week where you're not going to have coffee. Something so small.
How do you know that about me?
I did.
Because I'm going to take that in my little notebook here and go home with that. So,
but that's a really common one,
for
right?
sure it is.
Or like eating out or anything like
Yeah.
that, because it adds up really fast, but you don't think about it. So I think it's finding a small sustainable step like that, and then putting some gratitude into, I get to enjoy that really great coffee 3 days a week.
That's so true.
Like really focusing on those moments. But it's something so small like that can make a big difference.
Absolutely. I agree. My last question for you is a question that we ask all of our guests, and that is, what is one thing that you wish you would have known about money earlier in life?
Something I wish I would have known about money earlier in life would be that it's not just numbers and it's not just logical save money, spend money, get more money, whatever, budget. That is emotional. So finance is emotional. There's a lot tied to it, like we've talked about, anxiety, depression, stress. But I think, and I kind of touched on it before, but how it's tied to our self-worth. I think that's a really big thing in today's world, because so many people are wanting to keep up with the Joneses and what's on the internet and on all the social medias and trying to keep up. And the reality is just not there for a lot of people. And so it's, how do you not tie what's in your bank account to who you are, because you don't have to have a really full bank account to be a really awesome person.
Totally.
Right? Yeah. So you don't have to have that. And so it's kind of untying those things together, untying them. And then just taking a step back and realizing, like, you don't have to have all the money. So finding that balance between budgeting and saving and all those things, but also living your life, but within the constraints that you have, and that's okay.
Right.
So I think it's that emotional piece that not a lot of people think about.
Yeah. And that it's just not that serious.
Yes.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for just sharing your perspective. And I think you've provided some really cool facts and comfort too for those who are, struggling with this, because we never know who's listening. So thank you so much for being here and spending your time with me.
Well, thanks for having me.
Of course.
It was fun.
And thank you to everybody for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed today's episode and feel one step closer to making sense of money. Don't forget to subscribe and check out our newsletter at p1fcu.org. We'll see you next time.